Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast Real Talk with Sudhanya. And I'm your host, Sudhanya. If you think that you're not creative or not creative enough, or if you want to take your creativity to the next level, you have to hear today's episode. My guest today is born in Britain, raised in South Africa, and resident of the Netherlands. Nowhere and everywhere are his home. David Chislett is a published author, poet, musician, artist, and an entrepreneur for over 25 years. The link that joins everything in his life together is creativity. By sharing what he knows about this human capacity, he aims to improve the world, one presentation at a time. He has been on stage in one capacity or another since 1980. He brings experience, research, humor, and passionate energy to every presentation he does. When he writes a poem, he solves a problem. How to express a specific feeling in a way that will be recognized and empathized with. And every time he trains, speaks, or coaches, he aims to do the same thing: solve or help solve the problem that lies in front of his client. He's forever curious, which leads him to always ask why and how. As a result, his career has enabled him to join dots across many worlds. I really had a lot of fun talking to David today, and I hope you have fun too. Enjoy. So you mentioned from Wannabe a rock star to a suburban dad.
Yeah.
So before we get into the transition and transformation, I'm really curious about your life as a musician.
Yeah. Well, I'm the youngest of five children, and I grew up in a house awash with music. My mother's a chorister, so there was a lot of classical choir music, and my brothers and sisters were just mad about music. So there was always a record on in the house or the radio on really loud. And I think somewhere quite early on in my life, that just landed really well. I don't know, really powerfully.
Yeah.
And from the age of 10, I started writing poetry.
Wow.
And so by the time I got to being a teenager, it had occurred to me that the poetry could actually be lyrics for songs. And in my last couple of years of high school, we moved from one city to another, where I reconnected with an old friend from primary school who had also moved to that city. And he was a musician. He could play a whole bunch of instruments. And he had a guitar, and he taught me how to hack around on a guitar and play bass. And we formed a band.
Wow.
And wrote several songs based on my poems. I mean, we never did anything with the band, but that's where it all pretty much started.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's in the family, in the whole. Even like since 10 you were into poetry. How did that happen? Like what inspired you, and what was your topic then around?
Well, it was kicked off by my class teacher, who, in introducing poetry as a study at school to us, conducted an exercise of one of the many different hallmarks you can have for poetry is rhyme. And so she taught us about rhyme schemes and what that looked like. And so she showed us, A, B, A, B, or A, A, B, B, and what does a sonnet look like, and the whole idea of, writing a word down with the letter on each line, and then each line of your poem starts with the next letter in the word. And, just a whole bunch of kind of poetic devices as a way for us to then, in the future, have a frame of reference for analyzing or enjoying poetry. But for our homework, she said, you need to choose one of those things that I've shown you and write a poem to bring to school the next day so you can feel what it feels like to do it. And I wrote my one, and I was like, well, that was fun. So I wrote another one, and I wrote another one, and I wrote another one, and that was kind of it. I just didn't really stop. I think I took 10 poems back to school the next day, and pretty much from then onwards, I've had a book somewhere where I've been writing the poetry that I've written anywhere else into, and kept it pretty much all.
Wow. So you have a collection since 10 years old, and it was a sudden discovery of talent.
Well, I don't know about talent, but it was certainly a discovery of interest.
Yeah.
I found it quite easy to do, mainly because at the age of 10, I had a reading age of 16 or 17. I was a voracious reader. So I had a large vocabulary. I was a very precocious, annoying child, I think.
So what would you write about?
Those poems back then, I can't tell you. I cannot remember. But the stuff I have from the year after that, when I was 11, 12, I mean, some of it quite often obvious rip-offs of pop music that was on the radio. So I've got one which is a very bad imitation of The Hurting from Tears for Fears.
Okay.
And that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's surprising or not, because I've never spoken to another poet who wrote from very young to much later in life. But the themes haven't changed that much. A lot of it's about identity. Who am I? Where do I fit?
Right.
A lot of it's quite sort of
For me, it's only last 7 years, so I can't relate with your like inborn talent. And about let's go back to the rockstar. So what was like your dream and you had a band? So
yeah, we had a band, and when you're in a band, you're always hoping that you're gonna get a song on the radio, get a record deal, become famous, be able to do ludicrous things and not have to work ever in your life.
How did that go?
Badly. Played a few gigs, didn't get a record deal, had a demo tape or two played on the radio.
Yeah.
But my musical tastes were far from mainstream, so the bands I was playing in were even further from mainstream.
Right.
And in retrospect, what I realized decades later was that, I don't know, I can't honestly speak for the rest of the people involved, but I was not putting anywhere near the required effort into the mechanics of being a musician to stand any chance of sticking my head above water, above all the other hundreds of millions of teenagers around the world who also want to be rock stars.
Oh, okay.
I was a big believer in the fundamental myths of rock and roll, that it could happen to anybody and it's got nothing to do with talent, and it's just, you got to look cool and be cool and it'll happen.
So if you had to give a suggestion to your younger self who was wanting to be rock star, what would you your top 3 suggestions now?
Well, I actually practice every day, even if it's just 30 minutes, but have your hands on that guitar every single day. I learned to play guitar in 1987.
Right.
If I had done just that, I would be a really good guitarist by now, just technically. Forget the creativity, like whether I could be in the Rolling Stones or whatever, but just from a technical perspective, I would have a superb command of that
discipline.
instrument. Yeah. And I don't. I'm a hacker. I play badly. I have no grasp of music theory, and I cannot play by ear.
Well, you are a musician and you have recorded numbers, so I don't know. Maybe I need to hear, I think you're being very modest, maybe.
No, I'm not. That's the thing. That's the mistake everyone makes, because that's how really good musicians also speak. They say, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do that, but they can really play. I can't. Anything I have done has taken a huge amount of effort, and because that effort was not sustained over longer periods of time, in between the blocks of effort, the skills have fallen away, because that's what happens. It's the same with language. Right. Learn a language, don't use it, you lose it. And it's the same with music. So
that's what's happening with my Dutch.
Right. And that's what happened to, there were periods in my life where I was prepared to say, I'm a bass player, because I was playing almost every day and I was gigging and I was doing stuff. I don't say that anymore because I don't do that.
Right.
I can't actually the last time I played my guitar was a month ago. And before that was probably 2.5 years.
So you do jamming still, or you totally left?
Well, you can't jam, right? Because jamming is spontaneous improvisation with another. Yeah. Which means you've got to be able to feel or know where this is going. Yeah. I can't do that.
No, you need to be prepared.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you moved on to another venture after music?
Well, no, I stayed within music, but I
Yeah.
stopped pretending to be a rock star and decided to be a rock star on the sidelines and became a music journalist and a band manager.
Oh wow. What does that mean?
Which one? The band manager?
Yeah.
Well, typically, a manager of a band is the person who takes care of business.
Yeah.
So anything that has to do with the income that an artist earns is organized by somebody else. So you book gigs, you take care of publicity, and you take care of business,
Right.
record deals, distribution, making sure that the rights are protected and that you have a publisher to look after the earnings and all of those kinds
Oh,
of
wow.
things. Yeah.
Did you have fun in that?
I did, possibly too much fun.
What does that mean?
I'm not going to disclose that right now. But I also, again, 5 or 10 years after I'd stopped managing bands, realized that on a certain level, I wasn't really a band manager. I was more of like a road manager. I was the guy, organized the gigs, went on the road, made sure everything actually happened.
Right.
When it came to the management and the monetization of the intellectual property of the artists,
Right.
I didn't know enough, and I didn't really know what to do, and I didn't do it.
No.
And what I now understand about the music business is that is it. Your artist needs to be writing songs like people eat breakfast, and they need to be registered and dealt with by a publisher, and they need to be leveraged. It's great being a good live act and touring and getting the adoring groupies and all that kind of fame and adulation stuff. But if you want to stay in the music business, your music has to earn money. And there are very specific ways that the intellectual property that music represents is able to earn money. And that needs to be taken care of, and taken care of with great care and looked after.
Oh wow.
And that I just never really got into until I wasn't actually managing bands anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So like how long did you work as a manager or band manager for?
I worked in sort of 2 significant bursts as a manager. The first was from approximately 1996 until about 2001, and then again from about 2010 to 2013.
Right.
And
this is all in South Africa.
all in South Africa, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And again, because of my own proclivities, I'm typically choosing to manage bands that probably aren't going to become commercial successes.
Interesting. Why do you think so? You did that?
Well, because if I reflect on all the bands that I did manage, they were all really good. I mean, they wrote good songs and they were technically accomplished musicians.
Yeah.
But they were underdogs. They weren't part of the established wave of what was popular, and I always thought, well, this is more interesting.
Yeah.
Because for me, it wasn't just about the money. It was about the music and about everything that went with it. And so I was also managing with my heart and not with my head. So I was choosing to get involved with musical units that, statistically speaking, were unlikely to become mainstream successes. And when you're a manager and your money comes from a percentage of what the artist earns, if you want to earn a living, they've got to be actually pretty damn successful.
And popular in the sense in the mainstream, because
Right.
the artists you worked with, they were...
We didn't get
Good.
daytime radio play. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
So, as a popular artist, you make huge chunks of change from airplay, from the royalties that accrue from broadcast. And then after that, you stand a chance of making money from physical sales.
Right.
Or from streaming or what have you. Whereas our income was traditionally only derived from playing shows.
Right.
So there's an hour's manpower limit.
Yeah, like this is an industry which I have no idea about. So like maybe this is a dumb question. Now, like the current scene with music is maybe totally different from like in early 2000 or late 90s.
Yes.
Because right now there is no one single rock celebrity. There are so many celebrities. You have social media, you have your own independent Spotify albums. Do you think like life is easier now or life is tougher now for
It's
musicians?
harder. It's way harder.
Yeah.
But for different reasons for why it was hard in the past.
Yeah.
So in the past, it was hard because there were gatekeepers.
Yeah.
And they would make decisions that had very little to do with you or your music, very much based on trend and money and their ideas about what was good and bad.
Right.
Now, you don't need any of those people. You can go into a studio, or hell, you can just do it in your bedroom, record an album, put it out on Spotify and what have you, and it's out and it's being played around the world. But because there are no gatekeepers, there are also no tastemakers, which means how am I going to find your music when I live halfway around the world from you and I've never heard from you?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so how do you cut through the clutter?
Right.
I mean, even 8 or 9 years ago, there were up to 10 million tracks on iTunes that no one's ever played, not once.
Wow. Like, interesting. Like, because I have no idea about it, but like, I'm going off track. Back to you, David. So you were a band manager, like after being a musician, and then what brought you to being a suburban dad? What brought you to Netherlands?
Well, after I kind of jumped ship out of the music industry, I focused very much on getting my own writing out into the world. I focused on myself as an artist.
Okay.
And I published a book of short stories, I published a book of poetry, I published a business advice book for musicians, trying to like, okay, this is all I learned. Whoop,
Consulting,
put it out there.
consulting
Yeah,
musicians.
and I did workshops
that's very
and all
wise.
of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then I just, everything I was busy with kind of came to a natural end, and I had some ideas, but I knew it would take a long time to float. I was pretty broken, I was tired and just quite disillusioned and possibly actually burnt out. And I was like, you know what, I need a break. I'm going to take a break. Mm-hmm. So, you know, as one does, I sold everything I owned and bought a one-way ticket to London and took off.
Wow. Very bold step.
with no real plan whatsoever.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, an old high school friend of mine, organized me a job in a pub in the middle of nowhere in England. And I worked there for 3 or 4 months, and then I went traveling the world.
Wow.
And I didn't get very far before I ended up in Amsterdam, where I met the woman who's now the wife and the mother of my 2 children. And that was the end of that. So that's, you know, in very broad strokes, how I ended up here.
Right. And do you like it here in Netherlands?
I do.
Yeah.
You know, I was born in the UK, in England, in the harbour town of Portsmouth. We left the UK in 1974, which, if you know your economic history, is a pretty bleak time in the UK. It's one of the reasons why there are so many British expats in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and South Africa of my generation.
Right.
Because the UK was defaulting on its World Bank loans. Economically, it was screwed. The coal miners' strikes, everything that led to Thatcher getting into power was unrolling right then. And then we went back to South Africa because my mother had actually grown up there, even though she's also a very British stock. And that was just seen as a kind of safer option for the family than staying in the UK, which, considering we moved to South Africa just before the 1976 uprisings and, you know, into the apartheid state and everything that came with that. That's so I'm a classic 3rd generation kid.
Right.
I was born into one culture but grew up into in another, and as a result, I don't feel like I belong to either.
Still,
because now I live in a 3rd culture.
wow, like that. So let's get into even a bit more real talks. What does that mean for you now? Like, you mentioned that you belong to like nowhere and also everywhere.
Yeah.
I read that statement in your introduction. Like, how does that feel? Is it a good feeling or is it a chaotic feeling?
No, it's far from chaotic feeling because it's not dependent on anyone or anything else. You know, so, and that has both its ups and downs. So what I realized is that my happiness is not dependent on where I live, all the way through to what culture surrounds me. In that sense, I am quite a sort of self-propelled unit. Having grown up divorced from the culture that I was born in, into a culture that didn't and still does not accept me, I sought fulfillment in ways that I could exercise some kind of control over, and sought to actively identify with things instead of having those natural identifiers.
Not a natural belonging, but
No.
like created your own belonging.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So I now know exactly how to do that. So you can dump me anywhere in the world, and within 3 months I'll have found a way to be in that place.
I mean adaptability.
Yeah.
But like, okay. And do you feel also belonged here, like in the Netherlands, or like it's also in your own way?
Well, South Africa was way long time back, a Dutch trading property / colony.
Yeah.
And even though the Dutch descendants who still live there don't identify themselves as Dutch at all and haven't for probably a couple of hundreds of years, there's a lot of things, Calvinistic, religious kind of things which are carried over, which I see here and I kind of go, oh yeah, that's known to me. That's known to me. And of course, Afrikaans is a
Dutch
Dutch,
derivative.
yeah, it's on the same language tree. It's just been heavily operated on. So there's a familiarity,
Right.
but at the same time, I've been here now for nearly 9 years, and I'm not in any danger of being mistaken for Dutch or mistaking myself for being Dutch, and I don't think I'll ever feel that way.
No.
And I'm okay with that. I don't lie awake thinking, oh my God, what a...
So you
Doesn't
still
bother me.
intend to continue to live in the Netherlands
Yeah.
and still not feeling like, yeah, I'm Dutch.
Yeah, because I've lived in other countries quite happily without ever feeling like I was a
Needed to
native.
belong, right? Yeah. I also feel actually like that about Netherlands. I also here for 8 years. I don't know the language that well yet. I don't know why. Lack of discipline and practice, I guess, like what you mentioned. And also, I don't feel the need to... In fact, I definitely don't want to say that like, hey, I am this Westerner, because I'm very proud of my Eastern roots as well. But I also like the Western ways, so I don't know. So I can relate with you. Yeah. Cool. So now you are this suburban dad. Tell me, what do you like? Tell me about your current work or like current lifestyle.
Yeah.
Because you left being a musician, what I understand. Also, you still are a poet and other initiatives. But you are also, for example, a keynote speaker.
Yeah.
I think that's your main...
Yeah, that's my main bag. That's the thing
Right.
I'd most want to do.
Tell me, tell us more about that.
Yeah. I call myself a creativity activator. Having spent so long in the creative industries, as well as being a creative myself, and having researched the topic a lot, I know a lot about the mechanics of creativity. I think for a lot of people, it feels like some kind of weird, magical, genius-related activity. But in actual fact, it's so everyday, and all of us are so creative on a day-by-day basis that we don't recognize it as such. It's just a given. And as a result, we've come to sort of deify high creatives like rock stars or painters or Hollywood actors. And the sort of day-to-day accepted definition of creativity is that.
Right.
And so you at work finding a completely unexpected way to solve a pressing problem is just practical business skills.
Right.
But neurologically speaking, it's creativity. It's igniting the same 3 areas across your brain that a freestyle jazz musician will activate when they are improvising.
Wow, that's a beautiful outlook.
Yeah. But we just don't consider that creativity.
Right.
And so I've made it my mission in life to basically share with as many people as humanly possible that is what it is. And if you can do that, you can apply that capacity to anything,
Right.
which means that you can change the way you think, the way you behave, the way you react, because you have this ability to synthesize things, to make new from existing dots, or to go somewhere else with the dots, rearrange the order they're in so that something appears new or is experienced as new. Because I believe that creativity is probably the only way, in the way that the world works currently, in the East and in the West, capitalism or not, that as an individual, you can generate options for yourself and actually have real choice.
Right. Self-generated.
Yeah, because when someone says to you, you can have A or B, that's not a choice.
No.
So creativity gives you the capacity to generate options from which you can then choose.
It's sinking in. Like right now, if I go with what the society offers, like, yeah, either you are an engineer if you want to be a successful professional, either you are super good at creativity and you are a great painter or a great singer or a great artist, or you are an engineer, doctor, or lawyer or something like that.
Yeah.
But people who are having these kind of professions, which are like, a bit more corporate-ish and stuff, they don't relate themselves as creatives.
No.
Or if you are not in the top 1% of the artist clan, then you don't relate yourself as creatives. And in that sense, we all have this self-limiting belief that we are not creative. That's what you are challenging, that we all are, and that's a limiting belief.
Yes.
Oh, that's very interesting. So how do you do that? Like, you work with companies and, like, I think leaderships.
And just individuals, anybody. Because literally, it's about acknowledging that you are, and that's very easily proved. It's when last did you have a route planned to go to work and then, I don't know, you missed the train, or you're in Amsterdam and the bridge was up, or there were roadworks.
Right.
In that moment, what do? You go, okay, you assess your options, you look at what you do, what you don't know, and you go, right, I've got a new answer. That's creative.
Yeah.
It's boring, everyday, humdrum joining of the dots creative, rationally based, but it's still creative.
Right.
In essence, that is exactly what Pablo Picasso did when he came up with the whole idea of cubism. He just said, wow, look at that. There are 3 dimensions. And if I stand here, the woman looks like this. If I stand here, she looks like this. And if I stand here, I'm going to represent all 3 of those views on a flat plane for the first time ever.
Right. Yeah.
And everyone's like, wow, look at that. Up until that point, everybody was very concerned with using perspective and illusion to make a 2D representation look exactly like a 3D. And Picasso just went, nah, I'll just stick them next to each other.
Yeah. Right. Wow.
That's all he did.
Right. Like,
any fool could think of that, right? But he did it.
Yeah.
And he owned it, and he went through with it, and he nuanced it, and he mastered it.
Like, then, like, my next question would be like, yes, you're challenging us and telling us that we all are creatives. What's the benefit out of it? Why do we need to know that we are creatives?
Because I think, unfortunately, in modern life, many of us feel trapped and unhappy and unfulfilled and uncertain. And like, we don't really have much choice.
Yes.
And I've come to believe that that's because most of us don't believe we're creative. We don't believe we have the capacity to change anything.
Right.
And
like, we have to have this job and forever do it, even if I don't like it.
And I'm not a genius, so I can't do that.
Right. Yeah.
Look, I mean, high creatives don't help by talking about what they do in mythical terms. When if they were brutally honest, they would just say, look, I get up at 5 o'clock every morning and I do this for 3 hours every day. And I've actually just become so good at this, I don't have to think about it. So while I'm physically doing it, my brain's somewhere else making free associations, and this stuff happens. That's what happens.
Right.
Not, well, I had a dream, and it's quite tiresome sometimes listening to famous creatives talk about how they do what they do, when I know, neurologically speaking, that it's not that they're lying exactly, but they're choosing to tell only one fraction of the story.
Right. So you're saying that, it's not always the the talent or like the inborn or like the mysterious or the woo-woo part, which does exist.
Yes.
But it's only half of the story that
Correct.
big creatives say, because there is also a lot of discipline, there is a lot of practice, dedication, structure, action taking going into it.
Yep. All the stuff that nobody associates with creativity.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's enough to make you believe in conspiracy theories.
Yeah. So, like, how do you approach with your clients about it? Like to bring them to this knowing and to, spin that changeover.
Yeah.
How do you go about it?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of things, but the one thing I always try and do in some way or other is get people to admit that something they did was creative.
Okay.
So I will say I'll ask a room of people, how many have ever used an ordinary knife that you eat with to tighten a screw in a door or in anything?
I have done.
Right. I mean, actually, it's
Yes.
one thing that probably almost everybody from any culture has ever done.
Yeah.
It's like, right. So what you just did there is what's known technically as a bend. You took a device that was designed and made for a specific purpose and you bent it to another use.
Right.
That's a creative act.
Yeah.
It's not what a knife is for. How dare you use it to tighten a screw?
Wow.
But you did. Because you were able to, because you're a human being, look at it, look at the pattern and the shape of it, look at the problem that you had, visualize the tool needed to fix it, spot the similarities between these totally unrelated pieces of equipment, and push the one into the use of the other.
Wow.
Which is pretty much what happened with Agile and with Scrum. Come out of one environment and I was like, hey, look at this. This would work really well in a normal business environment, not just a software development one.
Right.
Wow.
I see that. I
Right?
see that.
It's a bend.
Right.
And so that's one category of creative activity that we all pretty much do.
Wow, that's a pretty rational way of viewing creativity, and I love it.
Yeah.
To also, it's very freeing to realize that, hey, maybe, for example, I like to write poetry, but this belief that you gave me now will also help me to do, I don't know, something else also.
Well, it's no coincidence that when you often meet, let's call them professional painters or singers, and you have a conversation with them, you later find out that they do macrame or origami, or they actually are also musicians, or they are also photographers, or they dabble with making films, or they're also actors. Why?
Yeah.
Because they have understood that in order to be creative, the first thing that's required is to let go.
Right.
And just go and see and deal with the fact that you're probably going to fail. You don't really know enough, but you're going to go and have a fiddle and see what happens. And so they put themselves in the way of realizations all the time by having a go, like a child does. Right. By not saying, oh, I can't do that. I'm not that sort of person. I don't have those skills. They just go, and they go.
Yeah, right.
And so they then learn that, oh, wait a second, if I practice that physical skill, then I can do this and this, and then suddenly I can do this and this, and oh, look, then this other thing happens.
Yeah.
And that's it. It's incremental. It's not sudden. It's not genius-like. It doesn't emerge fully formed from the ether. You get there.
And that's the fact for even big artists, because they have been dabbling with so many different things, and something that they, progressively explored and become better and better and better at it.
Yeah.
And indeed, I can so relate to what you're saying right now, because I was brought up to be you need to be an engineer, and then you need to do have this career. And then when I wanted to be a speaker or a poet, I was like, oh my God, I'm challenging the social rules. I'm good for nothing, because I'm doing fairly well at all of these things, but maybe I'll be not genius on any one topic, but that is something that the society is.
Yeah. But what does an engineer do?
Actually create smart ways to do
right.
things.
They solve problems.
That's
they
creative.
create. Hello.
Yeah.
So it's no coincidence that you wanted to. I mean, you chose poetry, which possibly most people wouldn't sit, but it makes sense.
Right.
You solve problems every day. You're in that mindset.
Right.
Why not solve linguistic problems, meaning problems by using poetry.
Right.
It's related. So creativity is not, it's not music, it's not poetry, it's not acting, it's not entrepreneurship, it's not invention. What it is a mental state, a thought process. And what happens is that we take content and we stick it in,
Right.
and then we use skills on what comes out to make a thing.
Right.
So to think about creativity as being discipline or content related is a fundamental mistake.
Wow.
It's a process.
Wow.
It's a way of doing things.
Yeah.
So if you are an engineer, you're going to take measurements and dimensions and weights and materials and you're going to shove it into the creativity sausage machine and you're going to get designs out, solutions. If you're a poet, you're going to take words and feelings and emotions and you're going to shove that into and you're going to get poetry out, and so on and so on and so on. What you put in will determine what you get out.
Wow.
It's got nothing to do with what comes out.
Right. Wow. Wow. How did, that's a very beautiful, I would say feminine and masculine way to put out what creativity is, because we normally tend to associate it with, feminine qualities. What made you like come to this conclusion to be creative? Like, I also want to know what's your one of the most accomplished creativities.
Yeah. I think it's a weird kind of, I think my openness to it is a function of my sometimes problematically independent mindset.
Right.
As the youngest of 5 kids, I grew up on my own. I was very much left to my own devices. Everyone was busy with their own stuff.
Yeah.
I got on with it, which meant I had to do a whole bunch of stuff on my own that probably is not entirely healthy for a very small child to be doing on their own.
Right.
But what I realized was that if I acted in certain ways, I got certain results.
Right.
So I'm actually an introvert, and I was a very shy child, and a
Really?
very quiet one. But I learned that if I behaved as if I was confident, I would get the same rewards as confident people.
So you started
So
faking.
I started presenting as that. And as soon as you get that kind of pushback where you present a certain way and then you get the rewards for it, then you become that.
Yeah.
And so I've never done anything that I've been qualified to do. I've always just gone, well, I'll give it a go. What's the worst that could happen? I'm not going to die.
Yeah.
And I've just done, and so that's kind of been the story of my life. I've always just, opportunities have come up and I've gone, oh, well, I'll give it a go. Who
I can see that, because right from being a musician yourself to a band manager to totally leaving South Africa and suddenly moving to London and then here and settling here. And you have also been coaching and also teaching languages. And also I know that here, and also now talking about creativity. I think that's very your inner child is very evident.
Yes.
That's very
Sometimes
beautiful.
too evident.
Which is good. We need more of you.
But I'm glad you brought up child, because play and creativity are very closely related.
Right.
Because when you play, what is the goal? What's the reward?
To have fun.
Right. I mean, there isn't really one, right?
Yeah.
It's the thing itself.
Yeah, that's it.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a very important mindset. And it's a very different one that we take typically into work-related stuff.
Be serious.
There's a purpose, there's a goal, there's a KPI, there's a ROI, there's a
oh my God.
choose your freaking 3-letter acronym. Play there is not, which is why play is so creative.
Right.
Because with no prejudgment, you step into the space and you see what emerges, and then you react on that and you run with it. But not so strongly that you say it has to go here now. You run with it until something else emerges, and then you change, and then you go, and then you go, and that's fun. Right. That's when you start to hit what Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi calls flow, optimal experience, otherwise known as happiness loosely. When you're operating just beyond the limits of what you think your capacity is and pretty much succeeding, you lose track of time, and amazing stuff happens.
Wow.
When you follow the rules, when you stick within what you know, when you play it safe, and you go from black to white, from 1 to 2, from A to B, you never enter that state of mind. And of course you're not creative.
Wow, I just love that. And suddenly I'm getting even goosebumps listening to that, because that's so liberating to hear from an expert and like who has like proven it again and again.
Well, I mean, I'm quoting other people's research here, but I mean, if you want to dive into this stuff, books by people like David Eagleman, the neuroscientist, Carol Dweck's book Mindset is, from a creativity perspective, is a mind bomb of note. And even Seth Godin's got a brilliant book about creativity. I mean, there has actually a huge amount of research has been done into what creativity is and how it functions. But most of us just don't even know that, because no, creativity is for those genius weirdos over there, not for me.
Right. So can you always be in a flow state? Are you always in a flow state, David?
No, I don't think you can always be. No. I don't think you want to always be.
No.
But
it sounds like I always want to be like in it.
I think what is important though is that when you hone your skills to the extent that you can step beyond your limits at will, it also means you can enter flow at will, which means you can control your own happiness.
Right.
And I think that's a really important thing. I mean, I'm a very rebellious person. I always have been. And the whole idea of discipline and structure and routine, I have always fought against. Because I never understood until fairly recently what structure and discipline and routine give you when you've gone through it. It sets you free. You know, when Ronaldo runs onto the football pitch and does these incredible moves, he's not thinking.
No.
He doesn't have to, because he's done it over and over and over again, and he is superbly fit.
Right.
So that in the moment, all he's thinking is, I want to do that.
Right.
And his body knows how to do that.
And that is his flow state.
And that is his flow state. He's just going for the solution. He's not thinking of the process. And that's what happens with creativity as well. That's why most artists can't tell you how they did what they did.
Wow. Like that's so paradoxical also, right? You need routine and structure and discipline to be creative and enter that flow state.
Yep.
You need to hone your skills.
So your blade needs to be so sharp that when inspiration hits, you can make what appears to be magic.
Right.
I may get the same inspiration as Picasso, but because I'm not a painting master, technically speaking, what I paint looks like a third grade kiddie's dabble, and he makes cubism.
Right.
That's the difference. Not the idea, not the inspiration, the execution.
Right.
Because everybody has ideas. They're overrated as a currency.
Right.
What is underrated is the ability to act on those ideas, to actually do stuff.
Right. Wow. So what's your idea, and what's that skill or that creative area that you're honing to, but so that when inspiration hits you or whenever you enter in flow state, you want to act on it?
Well, I mean, that's one of the reasons I went back to poetry after many years of not really writing on a regular basis. I'm 51. I'll be 52 this year, and
you don't look like.
No, you're very kind. But logically speaking, I've got less years ahead of me than I have behind me. So if I want to go anywhere with anything, it doesn't make sense to start anything new.
Right.
It makes a lot more sense to take whatever foundations I have in the way of skills and aptitudes and to fine-tune those. And if I look at my life, the things I have done the most are write and speak and be on stage in some capacity or other.
Right.
So it made absolute sense for me to distill that down into, creativity, speaking, but continuing to be creative. And what have I done way more than play guitar badly? Written poetry badly. So it's poetry.
Right.
And that's kind of been my strategy after kind of really figuring out a little bit too late that I had bought into all of these myths I was pointing to, bought into them to a self-limiting degree.
Right.
Now I'm kind of going, okay, what have I got? What's on the table?
Right.
What am I doubling down on now? Because
Right.
I don't have the luxury of another 10,000 hours. We can debate the merits of that another day.
Yes, I
in
wanted
order
to, but like, yeah.
to get to a point where I appear to be that much better than everyone around me.
Right. So now, of course, you're dabbling with many things, but like now what you want to like keep on practicing as a skill is your speaking.
Yeah. The ability to, through time on stage, have a meaningful impact on the lives of an audience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And also like, I think what you're doing through the creativity, like expertise, that's mind blowing for, I think, a lot of even nerds, because they would say like, oh, like I'm not cool because like.
No, but think about this. So this is hilarious. Picture in your mind your average IT geek guy, the guy kind of a bit of a programmer, a bit of a hardware guy. What does he look like? It's because it's mainly a he, unfortunately, still to this day. He's probably got long hair.
Yeah.
Probably wears black T-shirts a lot.
Yeah.
Quite likely actually even has black nail polish on. So he's probably some shade of a heavy metal fan, and almost certainly plays bass guitar or electric guitar to some technical extreme.
That's uncannily true.
Right. Why? Because programming and solving problems every day in IT is hugely creative.
Right. Yeah.
And so that means they're also capable of doing the math
Right.
of technical metal music.
Right.
And they're also isolated, so they emotionally relate to metal and.
Wow.
It's logic. There's nothing romantic or crazy or weird about it at all.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
I'm
And that
sorry, all
realization-
computer programming nerds who happen to be watching this. That's broadly stereotypical and ableist or whatever.
No, I, like we get the thing that it's like more on what's like trending in the market, right? Like at least I'm in the tech industry, and what you said does relate to me. Although I don't wear black nail polish, by the way. I'm wearing orange. So
Very nationalistic of you.
yeah, I realized that. It was unknowingly creative. Okay, so that's beautiful. And you also mentioned, like, I think one of the other topics that you also wanted to talk about is like daily habits. But like you already
You can see why.
Yeah,
the
it's all
relationship.
related. Because you mentioned that basically our habits define us to others and not what we really think about us.
Yeah. I mean, that's a scary thought, right?
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is that, say that you are a vegetarian,
Yeah.
and then that next week you stop being a vegetarian.
Yeah.
How will your friends react to that? They'll have an opinion.
Yeah.
They'll say, that's not like you. That's not you. What are you doing? What's going on here?
Yeah.
Because their notion of who you are includes your dietary habits. It also includes your vocabulary habits, your habitual way of expressing yourself, the habits you have when you walk, what you do with your hands. All of this, for them, defines who you are. Because they do not have access to what's actually going on inside your head, because we don't have that capacity as human beings. In other words, if you change any of those external facing or presenting routine activities, otherwise known as habits, to all intents and purposes, for the rest of the world, you have changed.
Wow. Like, that's a mind-blowing way to think of it also. As like, so what do you mean is that what I actually do as an action on day to day is more important than what I am actually thinking about?
In terms of what happens outside there in the world, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, which is not to say that I discount the power of thought. I do not. But if that power of thought does not end up in action,
Yeah.
to all intents and purposes, it has no impact.
And no like value or representation of you in your personality even.
Right. So you tend to then be taken at the value of what you do present out in the world to other people, not on what is going on inside.
Yeah. And for example, in that matter, if I say that I'm a vegetarian and I end up going with friends and always eating chicken or fish or all these things, that would also create an inconsistent personality of mine, because my friends would think that, oh, she claims to be vegetarian, but she's not.
Right.
Which is also like representative of like these are like very small things, but like in bigger terms like that, hey, I am I'm like I have integrity, or like one of my values is honesty,
Yeah.
and then in front of you, you know,
Exactly.
lie.
You say you do this, but then you do that. It's like, that's not very
Yeah.
integrous
Yeah.
or honest even. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's also hugely liberating, because what it means is that if you can acquire a new habit, you can, to a certain degree, change who you are, or at least who you are perceived to be.
Right. So what's that one habit that you changed? Like what's your top like habit that at least I can see?
Well, I must say my habits tend to go in cycles, but
Yeah.
for me, and right now I'm not doing this, but for me, the biggest thing that I changed, which took me from a wannabe writer to being a published writer, was actually setting a time and getting up at the same time every day and actually writing. So I went from being somebody who had always been told by teachers and mentors that, wow, you can really write, you're really good, this is blah, blah, blah. But I'd never published anything. Well, I had been a journalist, but people were always talking about my creative writing with those compliments. To being a person who within the space of 3 years had published 3 books, because I changed from being someone who had the capacity for being a good writer to somebody who wrote every day.
Right.
By getting up and putting in an hour every morning, Monday to Friday, every week.
And that made you feel and also like be, and I see you as a published author.
Well, what it did do is very Pavlovian, bell rings, dog drools, right?
Yeah, right.
Get up this time, sit in this chair, write.
Yeah.
So until that physical habit is embedded, and there's contradicting research on how long that takes, but say 2 to 4 weeks.
Right.
After that, you don't have to think, I need to get up and write. You just get up and you sit down,
Right.
and your brain comes online and you pick up where you left off.
Right.
Stephen King, in his very illuminating book on writing, talks about this.
Right.
Because that's what he does. He sits in the same chair for the same amount of hours every day for the period of months that he writes. And he literally says in his book, bum hits chair, writing braid comes on. Or words to that effect.
That's beautiful.
And that's what I changed. So I wrote a poem a day for 18 months, which turned into my first poetry book.
Wow.
I then published a collection of short stories, and then I published my 1212, The Guide to the South African Music Industry. And while I was doing that, I also wrote a 250,000 word novel, which no one will ever publish. But I did it. And that all took place in a 5-year period.
Right. That's
When I was already, that was from the end of my 30s, 38 to like 43. And I'd been talking about wanting to be a writer, as in a published author, since I was 10.
Wow.
And that was the first time that I came close to being it.
Right.
Because I just went,
Habits.
I'm not talking about this anymore. I'm not waiting anymore. I'm not waiting for someone to give me permission. I give myself permission. I'm going to do this. And then when I had the stuff, when I had the body of work, it was just a matter of finding someone who wanted it.
Right.
Okay, which is not a small matter. But when you have a body of work, you are 2 years ahead or 20 light years ahead of just about everybody else who says they want to be a writer. Because they're also just saying it. They're not doing it.
Yeah.
So I made a writing habit.
Right. Yeah.
And then once the poetry book was out, I decided that I was going to turn some of my own poems into songs that I had written, and I was going to gig them as another way of selling more books.
Right.
So I played guitar for an hour every day for 6 months until I was good enough to actually sit on stage and not make terrible mistakes every 30 seconds and actually play a gig of half an hour with my own poetry.
Right. Wow.
And I was able to. I mean, yes, I did know how to play guitar before that, but I'd never been solo. I'd never written the songs myself, and I did it.
Wow. That's very interesting. And I'm like, again, being a poet, I'm again getting curious back to like right now, are you still writing poems?
No, don't have the mental bandwidth.
No.
But I'm okay with that, because the other thing I've observed over my life is that I do run in quite long cycles with poetry.
Yeah.
I tend to be productive with poetry for anywhere between 18 months and 3 years, and then I just battle to write a word for anything up to 3 years again.
Yeah.
And I just come out of a massively productive couple of cycles.
Like multiple flow states.
Yeah.
So now you feel like, okay, it's fine.
And my whole life has changed.
Yeah.
You know, my whole experience of life changed. My situation has changed, literally, physically, emotionally. And I feel like I'm very much in the absorption phase, and I haven't got to the point of where I can now start to synthesize and produce.
Yeah, because I was curious to know that if, like, I asked you because I was curious to know that if you were writing now, what were you writing about?
Yeah.
Because that's like a totally different phase altogether, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've started trying to write.
Yeah.
I mean, I've written a few poems in the last few months. Of course I have. But I mean, I'm not writing.
No. Like,
and it's just, I'm very aware that I'm repeating myself a lot. So that's also what's stopping me. Mm-hmm. Just like, but I've done this before, and I haven't found a thing where I've gone like, okay, that was
inspiration
interesting.
hits you, or
Because what I've noticed is that what happens for me is I write a huge amount, and then I go into this fallow period, and then somewhere along the line I start anew. But something's happened to my style, to my voice, to my technique. And everything, when I start in a new period, it's different. It feels different to me. I'm doing something different with language or my approach. I
think that's the experience with every creative output that you have. You become a little bit more polished.
Well, hopefully that's what's going on.
Yeah. I do feel so as well. Like every time I write something, I feel like I'm getting better about it. Because like, you know yourself a little bit more. And then you also are okay to not do it for a while so that the inspiration hits you. That was very beautiful. And I think I'm very much inspired by all your very useful suggestions. And I think inspiration did hit me today.
Good.
And I wanted to close with something else, which is totally different fun, apart from like poetry and creativity, but I think a lot creative as well. I always end my podcast with a round of real questions.
Yes.
So this will be around 10 questions that I'm going to randomly ask. And these are same set of questions that I asked to all my podcast guests, just to see the various diversity and celebrate it as well.
Yeah.
So nothing is to be get fixated upon.
Yes.
So I just wanted to know your opinion on certain topics, and these are many times actually one-liners.
Cool. Hit me.
And I am not going to give I would say other answer you back or give my counter response to it. So feel free with whatever you feel like.
All right.
And let's do that.
Cool.
So here's my first question. White men rule.
White men rule. I put that into the past tense. White men ruled.
Not anymore. Sorry. The future is cryptocurrency.
The future is cryptocurrency. Jeez. Floated a fair amount of money into that idea after the entire meltdown that's just happened, and the fact that it's still rolling on, and that actually some of the platforms are just ceasing to exist? I'm doubtful. However, my mantra is that once a new piece of technology enters a marketplace, the old business model gets destroyed. I don't think there's any putting of the genie back into the bottle. So yes, the future is cryptocurrency.
Mm-hmm. Porn is healthy.
Say again?
Porn is healthy.
Healthy. Woo! Consensual porn is healthy. I think the porn industry is predicated on a large amount of exploitation of extremely vulnerable people, which is problematic. The question is, who is porn being made for and why and by who? So I don't have a problem with porn per se. I have a problem with some of how the porn industry is run.
Emotions are weakness.
No, bollocks.
Parents fuck up their kids no matter what.
We're only human, and I don't even want to know what my kids are going to grow up with in regards to hang-ups and whatever because of how I am who I am. They don't come with a manual. So,
Black Lives Matters movement made me more aware of reality.
definitely. I mean, I grew up in apartheid South Africa. I'm a white, middle-class, middle-aged male. I'm the definition of white privilege. As politically as aware as I liked to think of myself, the discourse that's come out of Black Lives Matter and the granular detail about the black lived experience versus what mine is has shifted my perspective quite radically. I'm quite a lot more aggressively aware of the issues and a lot less tolerant of my own kind's blindness in that regard. It's definitely shifted my perspective.
Okay, maybe let's go for the last one then. Like, it's a hard one to choose which one to go for. Yeah, let's go for this. Caregiving is an underpaid industry. Caregiving.
Whew. I want to ask a clarifying question. What do you include under caregiving? Education?
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Teachers, nurses.
Yeah. We value all the wrong things in this world. I mean, if the pandemic taught us that, anything, it's that. I mean, without delivery guys, Western civilization as we know it would have crumbled. And how much do those poor suckers get paid? Who's responsible for the future of our kids and how much do they get paid? It's insane. It's massively cognitively dissonant, and the fact that we appear to be comfortable with it is worrying.
I can't agree more. Yeah, and on that note,